So as you may already know, I have been in quite the slump for the past little bit. I mean, not little bit, kind of long bit. It's been a couple of months here, but I'm pretty sure it's just due to the fact that I have burnt myself out ever since reading 300 books in the span of about 365 days. So I shouldn't be surprised that, that's something you can't keep up long term. But either way, I realized recently that I haven't really shared with you the few books that I have been reading, even while I haven't really been reading a lot. So that's kind of what I wanted to do in today's video. But before I do get into the books, I did want to quickly share with you what I have been up to while I've been reading less, and that has mostly been getting tutorials ready for you guys so that you can learn how to bookbind in case you're interested. Because when I had posted my A Court of Mist and Fury from Rysand's POV, as well as my Manacled by Semlin Yu book reviews, you guys seemed really interested in how I actually got those books physically in my hands, because since they're fanfics, you can't actually buy them online. So you have to get them made for yourself or actually make them for yourself. So I decided to learn how to make it for myself, and then I basically talked about it in those videos, but I was kind of semi-vague about it only because I didn't think that everybody would be as interested as they were. But once I saw the response that I got, I decided to go all out and make you guys step-by-step tutorials on how you can make these books from beginning to end yourself if you are interested. And I decided to post all of those tutorials on my Patreon, which I just launched. So shameless plug, if you missed my last video, that is what my big announcement was. So if you are interested in not only learning how to hand bind, but also looking up my Patreon and seeing what I'm offering there, I will have a lot of information down in the description below and links to everything in case you wanted to look into that further. So with that out of the way, let's get into all the books that I have been reading recently. So first up, I have Chain of Thorns by Cassandra Clare. So I did read this more or less right when it came out, but like I had said before, I have not updated you guys with what I've been reading recently in quite a while. So we have a little bit of backtracking to do. But either way, I am very happy that I did finally finish this series, even though I very much did not like this series. So I don't want to go into too much detail about every single reason why I didn't like it, because more or less it's literally every single thing about the book. It just was not a series for me. I didn't really love how many characters there were. I didn't really love the general plot line of the actual book, what we were dealing with. I didn't love all of the drama. I didn't love all of the miscommunication. I didn't love the very unnecessarily love triangle. I just really was not a fan of everything that was going on in all three of these books, and yet I read them anyway, mostly because, sorry, my new dog is trying to eat the plant right behind me, but I read them anyway because I'm such a huge fan of the Shadowhunter books in general, and I didn't want to miss out on any information that was possibly trickled in all three of these books. So I am very happy that I finally completed this series so that I know how it ends and everything along those lines, but I never plan on rereading it again. So yeah, that is my very quick review for Chain of Thorns by Cassandra Clare. Next, I have Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. So I had read this book sometime in the past couple of weeks via audio. I actually was planning to read it physically. That's why I obviously bought the book. But then I had seen somebody review it via the audiobook. They read it via audio and they're like, that was definitely the way to go about it. The audiobook just was a good move for it. And then I was able to get it for free from my library via audio. So I'm like, you know what? Why not give it a shot? That way, especially because I wasn't per se dying to pick this one up. And I definitely do agree with the person that I had seen who had said that, where it was a good move to read it via audio, because I do think that it was a great audiobook. And I am very happy that I read it that way, because I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much if I read it physically. And that is mostly because I don't think that I was per se the right reader for this specific book. Not only am I just not a fan of coffee in general, and this entire book is just about following this girl who lives in a fantasy world that decides to start up a coffee shop in a place where nobody even knows what coffee is, but also I just wasn't per se into the whole all of these guys coming together to open up a coffee shop sort of thing. It just wasn't something that particularly interested me, even though I do think that for the right reader this would be a perfect read. So it either just was me, I don't know, I just didn't really click with the book and the things that it was about, or I just maybe picked it up at the wrong time. We honestly will never know. But either way, I will say that it definitely wasn't a bad book, and I completely understand why people had very much enjoyed it. Next up, I've got Because of Miss Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. So this is actually a prequel series to the Bridgerton series that now has a Netflix TV adaptation, and happens to be my sister is a huge fan of not only like the Bridgertons in general, but historical romances in general, and this is one of her favorite books. And because I've kind of been in a reading slump and I was like, look, I'm kind of over the same romances over and over again, I really need something that feels a little bit different. She's like, why don't you give historical romances a shot? Let me lend you this book. So that's exactly what she did, and that's exactly what I did. I did give it a shot, and I ended up having a great time with this. So in this book, you are following, one of the Bridgertons, where she basically ends up having some sort of romance with one of her neighbors. Like, they live on very far states from each other, but they're technically considered neighbors, who she never got along with. Like, basically, their families are very close, and she has always liked all of his siblings, but she never per se got along with this guy specifically. And then they end up getting themselves into a situation where he has to help her, and then they end up just like getting closer after that and realizing that they might like each other more than they always thought they did. And I honestly had a great time reading this. I thought that it was really easy to fall into the historical romance vibes. Like, I was a little bit nervous that like the wording of all like the whole book and like the vibes of like being in the olden days just might not click with me, but the way that Julia Quinn wrote it really, like, I don't know, I just fell into it right away. And I happen to think that this book was just so like witty and banter filled, and it just had something to it that really made me want to keep flipping the page. So it was a very easy read for me to consume, and I ended up thoroughly enjoying it. I'm not gonna say it was like the best book in the world, just because like I'm a super critical person and I can always find a flaw if I'm looking for one. But at the end of the day, I was in a reading slump and I tried picking this book up and I ended up having an amazing time with it. So that is really all that should matter. So if you were looking to get into historical romances and you wanted a recommendation, this is the only one that I have for you, but I definitely would recommend it. Next up, I've got Hail Mary by Candy Steiner. So this is the last book in her, I don't know what the companion series is called, but it's like a college football sort of companion series. I had read the first 3 books in the series. I did not enjoy the first one. I liked the second and the third one, and this was the 4th and final one, and unfortunately, I did not like this one either. So I had a lot of reasons for not liking this, so let's go through them one by one. So first and foremost, this had a very second chance feel to it, which I generally am not a second chance romance fan, but it had a different situation, so I was like, maybe I can actually give this one a shot. So the whole thing about this book is that when these two people were in high school, they were online friends. Like, they met online anonymously. He had no idea who she was, but she knew who he was, and they started falling for each other. And one day she tries to introduce herself in real life, and he just does not react the way that she wanted him to. She gets very insulted, but it was kind of a miscommunication thing where he did not realize who she actually was. So for a couple of years after that, he ends up feeling like he was ghosted because she ends up completely cutting him off because she was very insulted with how he reacted to her. So she now has a grudge against him, and he is kind of still hurt by the fact that he was ghosted by this girl way back when. Now it's a bunch of years later, he is on the football team in his college, and she happens to be his next door neighbor. Something ends up happening to her house. She ends up having to move out for a while, and he offers for her to move into their house, so they're gonna end up being roommates. So even though she has kind of a grudge against him, she really doesn't like him, he actually really likes her at the current moment in the timeline. Like, it's been years later, he has no idea that she's the same girl from high school, but yet he still is kind of pining after her. He just likes her for her now. And so it kind of has that sort of situation, and therefore it's kind of like a miscommunication thing going on for a while, where she is kind of like pushing him away and he's trying to be as nice as he can be. He has no idea why she doesn't like him because she likes everybody else besides for him, and she just like does not tell him who she actually is. But thankfully, about midway through the book, she finally does come out and like they clear the air sort of thing. So I was happy with the fact that that wasn't what the entire book was actually about. But unfortunately, once we kind of all got on the same page, I didn't really like where the rest of the relationship went. Like, I feel like it just started to turn into like a sex fest sort of thing. Like, they just kept jumping into bed with each other, and I would have been more down for a little bit more of like talking, being like, look, let's kind of deal with the past and where we both are now with the fact of our things. And I feel like we just had like one conversation about it, and then we just like moved on, and all of a sudden now we're in a relationship, and then we had to come up with like a different issue to have for the ending of the book. And Candy Steiner is very well known for having like over dramatic, unnecessary third act conflict / breakups, and that is definitely what we ended up getting with this book, which again, I'm very much not a fan of. So we started off with second chance romance, then we moved into miscommunication, and then we moved into very unnecessary and overdramatic third act breakups. So throughout this entire book, I just was not very much feeling it. Even though I did like the banter and the the witty stuff going on between the two of them, I liked kind of how they were reacting to each other throughout the entire book. I wasn't per se into either one of them, and I just was not really a fan of anything about it. So unfortunately, this book very much did not work out for me, and that is all I gotta say about that. But on a better note, when it comes to sports romances, I did also read Mile High by Liz Tomford, which is a very popular hockey romance going around the past couple of months. And thankfully, I actually did very much enjoy this. So I was a little bit skeptical going into this because anytime I see a popular book on BookTok, I'm like, okay, maybe it's not going to be for me because I just don't usually end up clicking with very hyped up books online. But I decided to give this one a shot anyway because I'd seen very specific people review this book who I very much trust their opinion, and they were saying good things about it. So I'm like, okay, maybe it actually will work. And thankfully it actually did. So this is one of those, I was a player until I met you sort of vibes. This guy is a professional hockey player. He sleeps around a bunch. He ends up meeting this girl who happens to be a stewardess on his team's private jet. And then they're going to end up having some sort of relationship. He's going to chase after her. She could get in trouble if she is friends with him or sleeps with him or anything like that. So she's got to push him away for a little bit, but obviously she's going to give in eventually. And then, it's going to be that sort of romance. So, I thoroughly did enjoy this book. Yes, there were some moments that I didn't absolutely love. I feel like it had an annoying third act thing going on. I can't remember if it was a full-on breakup or it was just over dramatic or something along those lines, but I remember the ending I wasn't per se obsessed with, but for the majority of this book, I honestly had a great time reading it. I think that there was a lot of good banter, good connection between the two of them. I really liked the way that it was being built up. It wasn't too fast, wasn't too slow. It had a good balance with it all overall and everything like that. So I honestly, I'd give it a thumbs up. I know that I was skeptical going into it, and then I ended up being pleasantly surprised. So if you were interested in this book, but you again were skeptical because of all the hype, I'd say that it's not oh my God, Blown Out of the Water is the best book I've read in the entire world, but it was a solid book. So I definitely would recommend it. And then what kind of sucks is that even though I liked Mile High, I did try picking up its companion book, which is The Right Move, and unfortunately this one didn't work out for me. So I actually did end up DNFing it 70 pages in, which I know isn't a ton, but also isn't too little for me to realize that I was either just not enjoying the book or I just definitely picked it up at the wrong time. I'm not sure which one it was, but either way, I just did not like this book very much from what I've read by it so far. So in this book, you are following the best friend from the girl from book one, as well as the brother from book one. So it kind of has a brother's best friend sort of situation, as well as still a sports romance thing because this main guy is a professional basketball player, and it also has a fake dating forced proximity thing. So this girl had broken up with her boyfriend that she was dating for a very long time at the end of this book, and she now needs a place to stay for a while. So she ends up moving in with her best friend's brother, who is obviously the brother from the main girl from this book, and then they end up getting themselves into a fake dating situation. So I think the biggest issue that I had with this book was that, from what I've read, was that I am not really into fake dating anymore. I did used to love the trope, but I've slowly fallen out of love with it, and now I just am not really a fan of it in general, and therefore I think I was having a very hard time connecting with the setup of this story. Obviously, I do like the author's writing, and I do like sports romances, and I was very much enjoying this guy. He was definitely a cinnamon roll. I was very down to get to know him a little bit more, but I wasn't enjoying the girl, and I really wasn't enjoying the setup of the book in general. So I just figured, look, I'm not feeling it, so why push myself through it? And therefore, unfortunately, I did give up on it early. But on a better note, I did end up reading all 4 books in the Heartstopper series, and thankfully, I had an amazing time with this. So if you're not familiar with these books, these are actually comic books. So all of the books in this series literally is a legitimate comic book, and they are the cutest things in the world. I've always heard great things about this series, but I just never had a per se urge to pick it up because I didn't think that the storyline would particularly interest me, because in these books you are following 2 boys in high school who end up falling in love with each other, and one of them is out in the open and the other one had no idea that that he was ever even attracted to boys, but one day they get set up in a class to, be partners on something, and then they end up becoming really good friends. And then obviously they're both slowly going to fall for each other. And the guy who didn't know that he was gay, obviously is going to have to come to terms with the fact that maybe I am not only falling in love with my best friend, but also who is a boy. So I definitely did enjoy the first book the most out of all four, but that's mostly because I'm just a really big build-up person. Like, once a couple gets together, I really just don't care as much about whatever issues they're gonna have to deal with. So in book one, I liked it because we got the build-up of their relationship and how they fell for each other. And then the rest of the series was them already together and then dealing with other things. So because it was a comic book and they were literally so easy to consume, I probably read all four of these books within the span of like 2.5 hours. So I had a great time with it, and it was just so easy to flip through the pages, and I really loved looking at like all the pictures. Like, it was just a really great time overall. But if you were gonna ask me which one was my favorite, I definitely did enjoy the first one the most. I think my favorite was the first, and then the third, and then the fourth, and then the second. I don't really remember though, because I honestly had a great time with all of them, and they kind of all blended in my head because, it was just like such a quick read for me because I read them all back to back. But either way, I really, really did enjoy this. If you were considering reading them, if you like comic books and you wanted to pick these up, highly, highly recommend them. And also, once I finished reading all four of these, I did jump into the Netflix adaptation because they did adapt this series, and they did the first season for the first two books, and I believe that the next two books are going to be season 2. And I watched them, and I ended up thinking that it was actually a really solid adaptation. Like, I really think that the TV show was really able to pull out the vibes that the books really gave off. Like, it really had that comic book feel, even though we were now like watching it in live action sort of thing. And I think that they really kept to the actual storyline. Like, I really do think that for an adaptation, it was honestly a really, really good one. So I was a fan of the books, and I definitely was also a fan of the adaptation. So all around the board, would recommend it all. And now back to a little bit of a bad review. I did also try picking up Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent, which is the first book in the War of Lost Hearts series. And unfortunately, I had to DNF this. And not only did I DNF it, but I DNF'd it twice. So I tried picking it up at one point, and I got 30 pages in, and then I realized that I just was not feeling it. So I put it down because I'm like, look, maybe it's the wrong time, and let's not waste a good series on a bad moment. So a couple of weeks later, I actually tried going back to it via audio, see if maybe like via audio it would work out better. Ended up being so much worse. Definitely do not recommend the audio. I just was not liking the narrators, the way that it was going down, and it was making it very hard for me to actually get into the book more than I already was having a hard time at getting into the book. So unfortunately, tried it twice, DNF'd it twice, and I honestly don't know if I'm gonna go back to this book, and if I do, it can't be anytime soon, because honestly, the reason why I originally picked it up was because of what everybody on Book Talk and Bookstream was saying about it, which was that if you're a fan of Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, you should pick this book up because they are so similar for so many reasons, and if you liked one, you'd like the other. And honestly, I should have been skeptical when I heard just that, because I feel like I can never really trust the general Book Talk community, only because I feel like we're on different levels. In my head, I always like to think of like Book Talk as like newer readers. Like, right when I got into reading books, almost anything was working for me. I just had an open mind. I wasn't very critical. I literally read a book and I was able to get myself into it very easily, no questions asked, and I just fell in love with almost anything. And I feel like people on Book Talk are in that moment of their reading journey where literally almost anything is working for them, and that is why they hype things up so much. But once you become a more critical reader and you're more seasoned and you've read so much, not every single Book Talk and Bookstgram book will work for you, only because you might have already read that book 10 times just in other formats, Like, at the end of the day, it's like the same thing over and over again, and you might be sick of it when somebody else might have only just read that type of idea for the first time. So I understood literally just from like the first 150 pages or so why people kept comparing this with Throne of Glass, because there were a lot of similarities, and I honestly think that might have been what was throwing me off. Like, if somebody had just recommended to me this completely randomly and did not tack on the idea of Throne of Glass, I might have been able to enjoy this more than I was. But I kept seeing the comparisons, and it kept lacking where Throne of Glass was thriving, and therefore I just was definitely in the wrong headspace, and I just was like, I don't know, I just was not feeling it. And then on top of that, there was just like, I don't know, more than even just the comparisons to Throne of Glass that wasn't really working for me. I just wasn't really feeling the way that it was being built up, and the storyline of it in general. And I know I didn't get like that far into it, and I know that it's like a slow burn, and people say that it takes like a minute for the story to really like build up on itself. But from what I read, I just was not into it at all. So I'm like, you know what? Let everybody else enjoy it. Maybe I'll go back to it a different time. But for now, it's definitely not working out for me. And the last books that I'm going to be sharing with you for today's video is the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. So this was actually a reread for me, and at the moment I did officially finish Era 1. So in case you're not familiar, this is a high fantasy adult series where you are following just a lot of political intrigue and war and stuff like that. It has an amazing magic system, and I am a huge fan of it, obviously because I did read it twice and it was just as good the second time around. But either way, this series is actually split up into Era 1 and Era 2. So the first 3 books, The Final Empire, The Well of Ascension, and then The Hero of Ages, take place a couple of hundred years before Era 2, which has like 4 more books, I think, at the moment. I have only read the first 3 books from Era 2, but this time around, when I do my reread, I do obviously plan to get myself caught up with the newer release, which is the 4th book in that, Era 2 series. So either way, I did my reread of Mistborn, which I am so happy that I did jump back into, because I did make it a mission for myself this year that one series that I definitely did want to reread was going to be the Mistborn series, and I'm happy that I finally started it because I'm having an amazing time with it. So I'm a huge fan of this series. Definitely recommend, even though I generally do read a lot of romances and this is definitely not heavy on the romances, I still highly recommend it if you are a fantasy lover. It does have a romance for you to follow, and it is an amazing romance. It's just not like, one of the main plots of the actual book. It is more heavy on like the political intrigue and the war and the magic system and things along those lines. But oh my god, is it so much fun, and I just love Brandon Sanderson's writing. So definitely had an amazing time rereading this series, and I'm very excited to continue on with my Mistborn / Brandon Sanderson sort of journey. So with that said, that's everything that I wanted to share with you for today's video. So I hope that you enjoyed hearing about what I've been reading recently. And again, make sure to check out the links that I'll have it down in the description below for the Patreon that I recently launched, which I'm really excited for, as well as, the Patreon, again, which has all of the tutorials for how to bookbind in case you're interested in learning how to do that. So with that said, I think that's everything that I wanted to share with you for today's video. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I really do appreciate it. And with that said, until next time, enjoy reading.